When you first sort of look at this, clearly some sort of abandoned town, but it's not like some small stagepost town in the middle of the outback.
There's a main street running through the middle. There's houses, hotels, bars, church, but it's not just one street. This place is utterly sprawling.
We're way out in the remote countryside, so there must have been a good reason for all these people to move here, some incentive to get people to settle these hills.
Lining the ridge above are rundown buildings constructed in a different style. Could these provide a clue to why a community grew in this unforgiving terrain?
Around this place is some pretty industrial-looking machinery, and that coupled with all the numerous buildings, this was clearly designed for processing something, but what that was is not so clear.
We've even got up in the hills, you've actually got what looks like some sort of abandoned tram line, and so there was clearly something very important that they wanted to move around.
But what exactly was being transported? And how does it connect to the eerily preserved houses and empty streets below?
It was clearly in its day a booming town, but something went wrong, and really rather fast.
Was there a really dramatic thing that happened that killed off everyone? Why is there nobody there?
In the late 1800s, this was a place of discovery, a new frontier, which in time would be gripped by fever, tainted by greed, and touched by war.
19th century South Africa was all about opportunity and exploitation. So although this place was in the middle of a vast and empty landscape, people flocked here in their thousands from every corner of the globe.
But what valuable prize first drew people here? And why did they so suddenly leave? The answer is buried deep in the ground and in the country's streams and rivers.
There's not really actually clues in the landscape that there's lots and lots of mineral wealth there. So in a sense, you have to be kind of looking for it.
In 1886, fortune seekers descended on the African continent, kick-starting one of the biggest land grabs in history. But a decade earlier, this region was the setting for South Africa's first gold rush. And the story behind its discovery is the stuff of legend. Joseph Mashego is an expert on the history of mining in this area.
When prospectors arrived here, there were no proper structures. So they used tents as accommodation.
Within months, 1,500 miners were working around 4,000 claims, united in their thirst for the most precious of metals. Before long, the ramshackle parade of canvas tents was replaced by buildings with iron roofs.
In its heyday, this was ground zero for the great South African gold rush.
This is the ghost town of Pilgrim's Rest, and these are the rivers of gold that built it.
Very, very quickly, Pilgrim's Rest became a classic boom town, a gold rush town. The population exploded. You had saloons and everything else associated with young men with too much money.
In under a decade, gold worth hundreds of millions of dollars today was pulled from the riverbed.
Now, when the prospectors arrived here, they had no machines, they had no chemicals. Now, how they separated the gold, they only use water.
So one of the classic ways of exploring for gold is looking in rivers, because rivers erode the landscape and concentrate heavy things like gold in them.
The kind of gold that they were finding here is what you call alluvial gold. It means gold that's been washed out of the big ore veins in the mountains.
The rewards could bring unimaginable wealth. But lust for gold also came with a heavy price.
Wherever there's been a gold rush, it has attracted adventurers, often reckless types. But they're willing to gamble a lot and live through a lot of hardship for this chance to literally strike it rich.
I mean, during such a gold rush, the environment is electric, but it's also dangerous. People would fall into despair if their particular plot was barren. They may even be driven to suicide. It was that sort of crazy environment.
Now they suffered a lot. Then they were alcoholic. It's how they misused their money. Only 5% got rich and 95% were poor.
In South Africa is a deserted town that was built on gold. At its peak, fortune seekers fought for the right to work the most valuable claims. At the turn of the 20th century, the region's riches would become the rallying point for a very different kind of fight.
At Pilgrim's Rest, the advent of the Boer War meant the mining industry pretty much shut down.
After 2 blood-soaked years of battle, the Dutch-descended Boers fighting for independence from British colonial rule were forced to retreat. The mine, however, had the potential to reverse this loss.
The Boers took over the area, and a lot of the miners were forced to leave.
Outmanned and outgunned, the Boer army desperately needed to raise capital. Using gold from the mines, a makeshift mint was hastily assembled. 530 so-called Pilgrim's Rest gold coins were struck. But before they could be used, the beaten Boers were forced to surrender.
But this was just the beginning. What was in store for Pilgrim's Rest was so much bigger than anyone could have ever imagined.
Hunger for gold would drive technological innovation. The mine's most productive days were yet to come, but the dreams of many were left in tatters.
Some of the different operations mining for gold, they merged and they built a much more industrialized mining operation that kind of took the place of a lot of small groups out there with their picks and shovels.
That starts to explain the big machinery. It starts to explain the sort of rock-crushing equipment.
So once you begin this mechanized mining operation, you need a lot of power to run it.
The solution to this was the Belvedere hydroelectric power plant. And this became the largest, at its time, hydroelectric power plant in the Southern Hemisphere.
We are sitting right at the bottom of the Blight River Canyon, where the Belvedere power station is established. We had electricity before England and France when they were still using gas.
This impressive feat of engineering pumped out over 2,000 kilowatts of energy. Armed with a constant supply of power, production at the mine stepped up a gear.
The real wealth of this area could finally be realized. This tram line took the mining of this area up to a whole new level. It meant that huge amounts of iron ore could be transported at one time, and with it, the gold that's hidden within. They were producing 112,000 ounces of gold, leading to a profit of 550,000 rand, which you might not think is that much money, but in those days, it was an awful lot.
But for Pilgrim's Rest, the industrial mining that brought such prosperity was the architect of its own demise. The land stripped of its worth, gold production steadily declined, and the people abandoned the slowly dying town.
Some amount of mining limped along until the 1970s, and then they shut down for good. But the town didn't completely disappear, as is so often the case.
In 1986, the largely deserted settlement was declared a national monument, a South African boomtown built on gold, preserved for future generations.
People love to see these dramatic moments in history, and there's nothing more dramatic than the idea of a boom town and gold miners and all that romance. And you can still see a little bit of it when you visit a place like Pilgrim's Rest.